Hello, listeners. Welcome to Untethering Shame, the podcast that explores the many ways shame shows up in our lives and how we can break free to live more authentically. I'm your host, Kyira Wackett, and today we're diving into a topic that touches every parent at some point: the complex relationship between shame, compliance, and good parenting. My guest today is Allie Payne, a certified life coach and relationship systems coach who has spent nearly 2 decades helping parents and teachers around the world build relationships with teens rooted in trust, respect, and meaningful connection. Allie's own story is one of resilience and breaking generational cycles. From being an award-winning student, an athlete, to struggling with an eating disorder, a suicide attempt, and an ADHD diagnosis, she's transformed her pain into powerful lessons for others. Allie's work has been featured in the New York Post, ABC Nightly News, and even The Rachel Ray Show. And in this episode, Allie and I are going to explore the intergenerational transmission of shame and compliance, the toll it can take on parents and children alike, and how we can rewrite the script for healthier relationships. So if you've ever felt like your worth as a parent depends on your child's behavior or success, or if you've wondered why it feels so hard to say no, this conversation is for you. So as always, get comfortable, turn off all those other distractions, and let's dive in. I am so pumped for this conversation. I feel like we met like 2 weeks ago. It wasn't like it's been years, but coming into today's episode, I'm like, I feel like I'm chatting with an old friend, yet also someone that like I'd walk into battle with, and I have known you for like 23 minutes. So I'm so excited to be doing this with you today.
Oh my gosh, I love how you describe that, because I'm like, yes, this is my shoulder to shoulder, arm in arm gal, and I think we could talk for 10 hours about like chewing on so much great stuff.
Oh, I know. I've just been ever since, and I feel like listeners, you've heard me say this before, but these pre-meetings that I have are so exciting, and they're a way to just make sure that the content that we're delivering is what you're all looking for and what we're excited to be talking about. But I feel like they are such a gift that it's so beautiful. When it's right, it's right. And so it's really been allowing me to just keep, my biggest goal is going to be, how do I make sure that we end this in an hour, because of how exciting this is and how many places we can go. And so, okay, I want to get right into it. Before we do, I like to start every episode just doing kind of an emotion check-in. And so I'm curious for you, as we're wrapping up 2024, everything is, both amazing and a shit show all at once. 2025 is coming in hot. If you could describe how you're feeling right now with one word, what would it be?
Hopeful. And I can't tell you that I have always felt that way. 2024 was not what I was expecting, and I am delighted that I feel hopeful.
Which I think is that great allusion to, I think sometimes when someone's not in that place of feeling that, they're like, that's so disconnected from me, I could never get there. And what you're kind of giving space for is, that is not a destination you've spent your life at. It's a thing that you've had to actively work towards and probably release some control over to allow yourself to get there as well.
Yeah, a lot of healing happened this year that I think I was dragged through like a ring through my nose, like a bowl, because it wasn't what I would have voluntarily said, yay, let's do this.
Yes.
A lot of healing to release so much deep pain I didn't know was there, which was holding me in powerless hopelessness. I can never do this. So to sit now with you today and say, I feel hopeful. If I talk much longer about it, I'm going to cry, because it's just the most freeing. I am so deeply grateful to say I feel hopeful.
Oh, that's amazing. And I feel like there is this sort of parallel journey. I've had a lot of, I think, inner child healing, some reparenting work I had to do that I really came face to face with this year, and just starting to explore other factors and what healing can look like, and starting to take some radical responsibility over the shit I really can control. And that's really scary and hard. And realizing that I'm not the sole creator of my suffering, but I'm also still a co-creator
Yes.
of the suffering. And
Yes.
so what role do I want to play? And so I'm very similarly in a place where I feel a little bit more space, like cavernous, like there's more space. Not
Yes.
everything feels so filled, which is kind of nice. And I'm excited about kind of what the next layer can look like in it. And honestly, a lot of my healing has been connected to parenthood, which is why I think I'm so excited about this conversation. And I know we're going to deep dive into this because for so many of us, our role as parents becomes an extension of our own shame and our own trauma stories and our own pain. And so I'm curious, as we just kind of jump straight in face first, why is it that we all feel like our kids have to be perfect? Why is this the pursuit and the pressure that is plaguing so many, if not all of us, that are in some sort of caregiving role?
Yeah. Yeah, because along the way, I would say more the previous generation or two, parenting has been equated with morality,
Mhm.
as if that is like that.
Ooh,
Like that's not even a calculus equation. They just don't belong together. Parenting is
yes.
not morality. But because that has happened, you were probably raised in an environment where your entire self-worth was wrapped in your external performance.
Yep.
Okay. So that might have meant your grades, your performance at school, your social network, how friendly, how many friends you had, if you had parties, the way you dressed, all of the things that you have a very strong belief. And remember, a belief is only formed from a continuous and repetitive emotional experience. Doesn't mean they're true. That
Mhm.
your belief formed that when you were pleasing, and I'm putting that in quotes, when you were pleasing to your parents, so externally
Mhm.
performing in a way that they valued, okay,
Yep.
you garnered a bit more, maybe verbal affirmation. Maybe you were told you were lovely, nice, kind, friendly, whatever affirmation that was. Maybe you got more physical, healthy physical attention. So hugs, tender touches, saying goodnight, whatever that was. Maybe you even got talked up to their
Mhm.
friends when you were listening. And so these were all things that you learned. And again, I'm going to put in quotes, believe are what make you a good, valuable, and lovable human. So it's no wonder this is plaguing us. It's no
Mhm.
wonder because this is how we were raised. And please, 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 this is not about your parents. Don't pick up the phone and call them. They did the best they could. They did not have access to everything we
Right.
have access to now, and they probably got it worse. So just leave that alone.
Mhm.
And so what's happening is now we are parenting. And I love that you brought up that you did some reparenting work on your own this year, because now here we are as parents. And if you can imagine for just one moment, your own inner child is like actually
Mhm.
doing the talking. So imagine you're facing your teen, your child, and your body is your adult. But inside is your little child, and your little child is saying to their little child, like with their hand over their mouth, like, the whole key to this game is being pleasing to the parent. So I'm gonna I'm gonna show you how to do that so we can like escape the shame, guilt, and condescension of the entire world.
Mhm.
And then this is like this weird little agreement that we make because it is based in fear.
Yeah.
It's all based in fear.
Yeah.
Fear of, exactly as I said, which probably the most common parenting tools in the old model is shame, guilt, and a heavy dose of criticism, condescension, one of the other toxic
Right.
styles. And so because those are so very real and very painful, we will do anything to avoid them.
Mhm.
But now as a parent, that means you had better do what it takes
Mhm.
to control your child, or at least produce a compliant one,
Mhm.
or you open yourself to that same risk that you were in as a child when you weren't externally pleasing. And your child is now an extension of you, an unhealthy extension of you, which
Mhm.
is part of your need to externally be pleasing, lovable enough. So now we are like projecting our fear onto them and requiring them to be compliant, AKA perfect, which is so fucked up. It's not even funny.
Yeah.
Like none of that is true. And I'm going to say that I hope if you get one thing out of our conversation today, you can look that nonsense in the face and just give it the finger, because you have no more space and you have no more time for it. And you're not going to play that game.
Well, it's so interesting because it brings up, I read the Bell Hooks book. Gosh,
Yes.
that felt like a bigger tongue twister than I expected it to be. But I read the book all about love.
Yes.
And the key takeaway, I think that really what you're talking about is this idea that many of us grew up believing that love, which we kind of saw on the surface as acceptance. And again, those little things, like you said, more hugs, more attention.
Yeah.
But ultimately love, which is the biggest piece that we're looking for, was conditional.
Yes.
Your love was based on how you performed.
Yes.
And so you don't quite understand. And it's still that way in our friendships.
Yeah.
Who's a better friend, who's a better partner, who's a better, whatever the case may be, obligation starts to root itself because we believed there's these standards that we have to meet to be lovable. And you're right. I think it's so easy for us to, and many people reject the idea of these kind of healing processes and going back and talking about parents. We're not saying that the parents are the villain. I think there's this Thich Nhat Hanh book that talked about you're going to be disappointed by your parents because you expect that your parents were supposed to be better than you, but that was never the goal. It's a relay where we're passing the baton where each generation is supposed to take it one step further. And so you're right. They didn't do this to us because they thought this is going to be fun. Let's watch this social experiment and see how our kids go in the world believing they're shit unless they're perfect. They were trying to do what they were taught would help make us safe. If we can be compliant. I mean, again, their teenager talking to our little kid. And so it's interesting. And then thinking about this, I had two thoughts from the parenting perspective. Now my daughter is a representation of me in the world. And so what you started to allude to, and there's this idea of, I carry it sort of twofold. I'm mom, which already carries this idea that I'm supposed to have it all together. I'm supposed to be perfect. I'm supposed to be great. Two, I'm a fucking therapist that has worked with kids for a very long time. So they better not have a meltdown. I should know exactly how to handle these emotional outbursts. I am equipped with the skills and resources, and so I should be able to handle it. So when she does have a normal human reaction for a 4-year-old, it's a threat to me and my standing because somehow I fucked it up. And then to her, because I don't want her to be perceived as difficult. Because if she's perceived as difficult, her life is going to be hard. Instead of going, nobody is even looking at her. Nobody cares. I have left so many play dates or like points where now I'm comfortable telling the other parent, hey, I'm in my head about this and I know this is unhelpful, but I need to talk through it. And they're like, Kyira, she's just being 4. Like that's all that means. She had a hard day. You didn't fuck up. Neither did she. Both of you are equally deserving of love and support and kindness. But for us, if we don't have that outside person telling us, unfortunately, because we're not maybe believing it yet internally, many of us get stuck there. And that shame compounds and compounds and compounds. And then it's like we're trying to make diamonds. We're just trying to crush them into be this person, be better, do better. I need you to represent this, which we've seen doesn't do anything for the parent or the child except create more shame, blame, dissension, anger, and we could go on.
It's the generational cycles. It's just rolling downhill.
Yeah.
It's just rolling downhill. And generational pain will not only perpetuate through generations, but even amplify.
Yes.
Until one person is willing to do two things. Number one, it ends with me. And number two, fully feel that generations of pain, digest it, puke it back up, and release it. And I think that alludes to kind of some of the work that you and I are talking about that we're both in the process of doing, whatever. That I don't think that anyone, and, I love that you just said, this whole perfectionism, just bullshit, that somehow that makes you a better parent. Good kids don't come from good homes.
Mm-hmm.
Bad kids don't come from bad homes.
Mm-hmm.
That is nonsensical.
Mm-hmm.
It is nonsensical. There are amazing kids who come out of the most challenging circumstances and become leaders. And there are children who come out of the most affluent, I'm going to say, at least from a surface perspective, again in quotes, perfect, because there is no such thing, perfect parents and home, and struggle their entire lives. And so if we can just for one hot second stop playing elementary math with our parenting, that 1 + 1 = 2, that if I say this, then you do this, that equals I'm safe. Stop it. You are dealing with an autonomous human being with their own thoughts, brains, feeling. You are not dealing with an automaton, which is a robot that you put together, so they are somehow a direct reflection of you, and you can like open up the slot in their back and like program who they are and how they show up in the world. That's not happening. So 2 things about this, again, about you being a therapist and this whole perfection thing.
Yeah.
And that feels amplified for you, which I really empathize with as a relationship systems coach who's working with parents of teens. And I got 2 teens, and my oldest is autistic and ADHD, and he is a lot less than charming and friendly on his bad days or challenging days. If this, oh gosh, I hope this sinks in if you're listening to this. Do you know what's going to have your friends calling you and commending you is not actually raising a suppressed hot mess of a kid who looks good on the outside? That's actually not it. The thing that's going to get you perhaps admiration from your friends and family and questions on how you're doing it is how you are working with your child and how you are managing to respond the way you do to create a respectful and responsible human who makes mistakes, takes accountability for them without like hanging themselves on the cross, builds resilience, confidence, can learn from those mistakes because it doesn't impact their worth as a human being, and becomes this curious, friendly, open, compassionate, introverted or not, human being. It's not the raising the perfect human that gets you the most accolades. It's the how do you manage the imperfection, messiness that builds resilience and confidence human. That's what people will admire the most. So just want to clear that up. And I think the second point I wanted to make on that, which I think Glennon Doyle says the best in one of her Super Soul Sunday presentations, she said, your job was never to protect your child from pain. As if somehow, because you have also not learned how to feel and experience pain. Because remember, you're going to be the one that says it stops with me, and you're going to digest it and chew on it and puke it back up and leave it where it was. It's that your job is to point them toward the pain and say, you're bigger than this. You got this. And I'm beside you. I'm not going to rescue you. I'm not going to fix it all, but I am beside you. Let's do this. That's your job.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because I feel like as you started talking about the equation, I had just written down, why do we quantify parenthood? So it's interesting that you and I are synced up there, because I think that the idea behind it, and I think social media has made it even more difficult for us, is we go so fast with the expectation that our doing is a reflection of our value.
Right.
And so there's no room for inconvenience, and children are an inconvenience. I love my daughter. I love her. I wholeheartedly, I had the privilege of getting to choose to have a child, to be able to have a child, to be her parent, to be in her life, to have this beautiful experience. She's still really fucking inconvenient because she has needs that don't often work with my schedule, that is driven by shame, that says you need to produce, you need to do, you need to perform. She then becomes an inconvenience when she can't do that. And that hustle is a cultural norm, in my mind, really collectively founded by all of our shame that says if we just do more, we'll feel better. And so our emotions were an inconvenience growing up.
Yes, they were.
Stop crying. Stop being sad. Don't be mad. Get over it. Go to your room until you can act better.
Mm-hmm.
Your pain, how do we fix this? It's not that big of a deal. Get over it. You'll be fine.
Mm-hmm.
So we started to say, okay, so it's not safe to have that there because it stops us from the doing and the performing. Okay, I get it. I get the system. So I'm going to protect my kids to make sure that they don't do things that are an inconvenience so that they don't feel that feeling.
Mm-hmm.
But what we're not realizing is what you said. We're just teaching them the art of suppression and repression.
Yes.
To value a performance
Mm-hmm.
rather than embodying themselves fully. And so I feel like the big thing that, at least for me, that I had to learn, like even little things, like Everly would go to sleep and it was like, okay, if she goes to bed by 8, then by 8:15 or maybe 8:30, if I still have to clean up the kitchen, I can have an hour of work time. So maybe I can squeeze in a client, or I can get some of my notes done, or I can work on this pitch for this thing. Okay, great. Fuck, it's 8:11 and she's not in bed. Now it's 8:17 and she's coming up telling me that she needs to go to the bathroom again, or she's having a hard time. Now it's 8:28 and I still haven't cleaned up the kitchen. What the fuck am I supposed to do? Because now the world is closing in on me and my worth and value is going to be subject to scrutiny, and she's the inconvenience getting in the way. So I need you to be compliant and go the fuck to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Stop bothering me. Instead of saying, she's 4.
Right.
She needs to understand boundaries. There's a value in that. There's boundaries. There's, hey, honey, I know that you had a wonderful day and going to bed feels like, gosh, now all the fun has to end and you just want to stay up. I totally get that. I feel like that too.
Right.
We really need to listen to our bodies and go to sleep. Mom's going to come give you one more hug and kiss. I love you so much. I can't wait to have fun tomorrow.
Right.
That version of mom doesn't come out when I'm just pissed because I'm calculating all the things she's getting in the way of.
Right.
That's that. It ends with me. I'm going to regurgitate, let it go. It's not just my family generational trauma. It's the processing that I live in a world that tells me these things and will tell me these things for the rest of my life. And I'm still going to spit it out and say, no, thank you. Because I don't like the me that I become when that's not only the parent I am, but the person I exist as in the world.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I love what you just said. I want to piggyback on this because it's not just the generational messaging. It's that, as you said, that you were raised to only have shiny, happy, sparkly, friendly feelings that had other people feel comfortable, which fed the whole performance and being pleasing and lovable and enoughness. So when your child is not in quotes compliant, which again, it's a ridiculous whole thing. You are now, because I heard you say you did some reparenting work this year and you did some emotional work too. There's the reparenting work on the fucked up messaging, but there's also the emotional maturity work that we were not given the opportunity to do because you and I are so freaking uncomfortable with fear.
Yes.
Because we weren't, as you just said, we were not allowed to feel it. We were not allowed to feel fear, sadness, frustration, anger. We were supposed to suppress all of that shit because it made other people uncomfortable, which put our connection with our caregivers at risk, which is kind of the definition of shame. And so because our brains are wired for connection, for survival, we did so. So now here we are as adults trying to raise whole humans, but we are still half humans. Because it is our work to learn to feel all that uncomfortable, messy stuff and be okay with it. And okay might mean snot crying and shaking and pacing and sometimes not sleeping and panic attacks. That's all part of the healing process. At least it was for me. But it is such a part of building my own, taking responsibility for my own emotional maturity, which it doesn't mean I'm not intelligent. It doesn't mean I didn't want to. I just didn't even know what that was.
Mm-hmm.
I had this, okay, you can feel free to laugh at me because I laugh at myself. And this is for real. I tell you this, the truth. I thought as a parent, I would be Mary Poppins. That's right. That's right. You can have it, whatever. Because you see, I had already done years of therapy.
Yeah, you were cured. You were amazing.
I had done a decade of personal development work on top of the therapy. I'd done a decade, like a program a month for 10 years, assisting, learning to lead them. So you see, I was just going to be Mary Poppins, and I was going to mean what I said, and I was going to do what I said. And my children, I was never going to have to raise my voice, and they were. And this is literally what I thought.
Mm-hmm.
And when that, lo and behold, did not happen,
Mm-hmm.
I was left facing my enoughness and sitting in the fear that my inner child still had, because I was no longer being pleasing, because my children, which were an extension of me, were not being pleasing.
Yes.
So I had to come face to face with all of my exiled, very uncomfortable emotions that I made up, made me a lesser human being, to
Mm-hmm.
become a wholer human being, in order to understand how to give my children the opportunity to have just a couple years less therapy, because they were going to be raised as whole humans, not
Yeah.
bratty, not entitled, but they were going to be given the experience to embrace, feel, chew on, digest, and puke out all their emotions in the moment,
Yes.
not in a therapist chair for 10 years later, so that they had a sense of what wholeness was,
Mm-hmm.
even though they also understood what boundaries meant. They also felt safe to fail, not because I
Mm-hmm.
was going to fix it for them, but I was going to sit in the mess with them and be like, yeah, this does suck. Let's have a good snot cry. Let's feel afraid. Let's feel all the feelings. I'm here with you. So now what? What do you think is the
Right.
next best step?
Right. Right. I mean, I think the two things that are coming up for me with that. So first, this idea of teaching our kids how to fail and fumble. And Everly struggles with this a lot. She really likes to be good at everything. Every kid struggles with this in different ways.
Sure,
But she
sure.
would get to a point where every time she'd try to draw a heart, if it wasn't perfect, she'd want to crumple up the piece of paper. And I was like, nah, we're keeping the heart. This is a really cool idea. Like, you don't get to throw this away. Like, she was going to throw away my Mother's Day card she made this past year because she put, I can't remember if it was, I think it was the S, but like one of the letters she wrote backwards. And it was unacceptable because it wasn't perfect. And I was like, no, thank you. This is my Mother's Day card, because every single bit about your learning is something that deserves to be celebrated. What are we saying if we throw this away? We're saying
Mm,
you are not worth celebrating. This card isn't worth my acceptance until it's perfect. Not acceptable. We don't do that here. I
that's
fuck up
right.
all the time.
Yeah.
When I make a mistake, like, we move forward. So I feel like you're giving that space to be like, failure is actually the goal. If you're not failing, I've just taught you, going back to your sort of automaton idea, I've just taught you how to perform. And I know, and you know, and many people listening to this know, we could do that. I had straight A's all through school. It's not because I knew how to learn, it's because I knew how to perform.
That's
I
right.
could teach my kid to do that easily. It's the I don't want to. And the second part that came up in that is, I don't think you're the only person that thought you were going to be Mary Poppins. I think a lot of people did. Part of that, I think, is this idea that we've made. I appreciate how accessible information is. I don't appreciate how black and white it often can be shared. So, gentle parenting is a way to parent. You are not going to be a gentle parent all the time.
Oh, heck
The
no.
idea of like, let's talk about your kids' feelings. Let's not just like shame them. Super cool idea. But let's also, it almost feels like there's an A team and a B team. So there's the A team that are the people that have this gentle parenting thing down. And then there's a whole bunch of people posting on social media that are like, well, I made the B team because I can't do it. So we're subpar, but at least we're grouped. And so there's this idea of there's still a goal.
Yeah.
And if we add into this, because I know you talk a lot about the systems that perpetuate it, this healing is hard enough if we were doing it in an enclosed container by ourselves. Still
Mm-hmm.
tons of snot cries, pain, and tears. But we're not doing it by ourselves. We're doing it typically still connected to our family or
Mm-hmm.
our other relationships that have often triggered us to go back to that performance self. So
Mm-hmm.
we've got the looming judgment of a parent, of a great aunt, of a grandma commenting on how our child should be. We've got that with other people out in the world. And now we also have school systems where the
Yes.
way that they are talked about is based on compliance. And
Right.
so I'm curious how you layer that piece into the discussion, because it's not just, again, this isolation tank. It's, hey, we're also asking you to do this with daily reminders that the world is not going to support you doing this, at
Mm-hmm.
least not yet.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So I love that, because I think we've turned gentle parenting or healing or breaking the cycle. I don't care how we've turned that into a whole other version of performance. And it
Yes.
all comes back to performance thinking.
Yes.
Stop it. Stop it, stop it, stop it. Stop the madness. Like, it's not like you just said, it's not like now there's like another level of the game that you're supposed to reach. It's like we're supposed to be even more perfect because we have access to this information. We're supposed to be more perfect because our generations are normalizing therapy. We're supposed to be more perfect, and so are your children because we know more about parenting. Stop it. It's all goes back to performance-based thinking, which stems from one thing: fear of not being enough.
Yes.
So here's what I tell parents in my programs. You cannot fail at something for which you were never trained. You cannot fail at something you never had training at. So in my programs, if there's one thing I do, it's I love all over these parents, because how else are they going to model the kind of compassion that is required to undo this bullshit compliance with their teen if I can't model that same version of compassion so they can undo the compliance of being a parent? So there's 4 C's that I use, and I don't take credit for them. I actually read them in a book about anxious attachment. It's that we are so obsessed with compliance and capability. Compliance being do what I asked, do it when I asked, do it the way I asked, and capacity, capability being like, do your homework, attend the school, get the good grades so you can get to the good university, to have the good job, to get married, and the picket fence and the kids, blah, 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 whatever. As if somehow that defines happiness for the entire world. Perfect.
Yes.
We're not all living in the movie Truman. So those are the 2 C's that we have been raised in, as has previous generations. That was all they knew. There wasn't 4 C's. There was only 2.
Yes.
What we know, and this goes back to kind of systems thinking, is that the 2 C's that we're missing is compassion, which I just mentioned, is compassion for self and others, compassion for humanity, which I'm going to talk about in a second on how that leads into failure, and then connection, which we've already talked about, is the luxury of learning to connect with self, learning to connect with all of my whole human experience, because there are no wrong or bad human emotions. They are all human, period. They're just all human. And to the degree I have safety to experience, articulate, name, feel, digest all of them, I'm actually far more resilient and confident and buoyed against a whole ton of other risk factors, some of which being mental health issues, substance use, promiscuity, all of those things. So when we add compassion and connection, compassion being, again, it's okay to fail. And this is the biggest, like, there is no bigger word that our generation was taught to avoid, because it disconnected us from our caregivers, often subjected you to verbal degradation, verbal abuse, sometimes physical abuse, emotional toxicity, and some other cool things. There was a real survival need to avoid anything that looked, sounded, tasted, smelled like failure.
Yeah.
So now you're probably listening to us talk about, like, we have to let our child fail, and being like, oh, I am sorry, no thank you. A good parent, I have parents tell me this all the time, good parents do not stand by and let their child fail. Like, what the fuck is that? That's called raising a snowflake? No thank you. I mean, you want to see a parent get triggered, talk to them about letting their child fail. Now, here's the problem with that thinking. And I understand that triggering fear, because your inner child just went back to your experience of failure and being probably shit on, or like I said, emotional abuse, physical abuse, all the awesome things of the 70s and 80s that went on behind closed doors that was just normal, but not illegal somehow. Now, letting what we know about the science, okay, this isn't that we're going to bring really lenient parents. We know that the science of failure means a couple things. Your child, first of all, needs to fail to learn. So if you think about when they were a toddler or a baby and they were learning to walk, I don't know how many of your children just jumped up one day and walked, probably 0. and probably even a smaller number of 0 got up and just ran one day or just opened their mouth and started talking in sentences. It is not how our brains work, full stop, period. We must try, and try again and be wildly failing in the process in order to get to any version of mastery in any particular skill. Okay, so that's necessary. Now, as a teen, because that's my arena, teenagers are failing wildly everywhere, all over the place, mostly in really poor choices. But that's because their brains are wired for that and they need to fail in order to succeed. They've got to get it wrong. But that triggers our not enoughness and need to be perfect so bad that we are stopping our children from failing because of our own fear.
Yes.
And now we have children who are being raised with learned helplessness. Yep. Because we have lawnmowered and snowplowed and whatever you want to call it. We've rescued the crap out of them. They're like being raised in bubble wrap. And number 2, they're being raised in learned hopelessness because they do not feel as though they have any agency or resilience or power over their environment. Because, and I did this, I'm raising my hand, I did this because I intervened too much and made all the choices and made the phone calls and I cleared the path so much that they didn't have to. I definitely went through that phase. I did that. And so we must remember that the beauty of failure is that it is the only path to success. It is the only path to mastery. So I want you to check your fear story about failure. And that's what I say to the parents in my programs all the time. We're going to talk about our fear story of failure because the more we talk about it here, and I will snot cry with you because I'm like a serious sympathy crier. Let's cry about what that meant to you and the deep, very real pain of what failure meant to you so we can end that here.
Yeah. I love that you broke down those 4 C's because I think a lot of it, when we only have compliance and capability, is this notion that then non-compliance is a threat to connection and survival.
Yes,
and
it is.
So it's a threat to the collective and it's a threat to the individual. And
That's
so
right.
then when we see that and we've been conditioned to believe that, and we have these deep rooted shame beliefs that there's a checklist. And if our kids can do this, they'll be okay and we'll be okay.
Right.
What we're doing is we're parenting from a place of reaction, reaction to our unhealed wounds.
Yes.
Which really puts us, if we're being honest, in a codependent relationship with our kids.
Yes, it
because
does.
we're asking them to heal our pain by being compliant, good little children that reflect, see mom and dad, see my old teachers, see all the people that thought I wasn't good enough. Look how fucking good I am. It's reflected in my kid who's going to go to Harvard and is going to be a lawyer and is going to do these things, not my kid who's suffering from a drug addiction and all sorts of other things going on. So we start to enmesh ourselves there because it's our unhealed wounds that are just longing for that. So I like that idea of first, you really need to get clear on your pain, your wounds, what happened when you failed. And it doesn't mean you were playing in the soccer game and your team lost. That's one form of failure, but it's also failure like when my daughter the other day was just pit. She's had a cough for 3 weeks after getting a virus. She's not sleeping, and both of us aren't because she's up for an hour and a half or 2 hours every night coughing. She's a bit reactive. She's sleep deprived and she still has things she needs to do. She's going about her day. Sometimes she's kind of a dick. So she'll be like, well, do this. And I'm like, whoa, that feels like that came out of nowhere. That's a failure. She failed in the way that she engaged in the sense that she tried something on that didn't really work. It didn't work to get what she wanted. It didn't work to build connection, to build that compassion. It was a reaction to her pain. But if we boil it down, it's non-compliance. She's being shitty and disrespectful. She needs to be compliant. You don't talk to me that way. Instead, we go, oh, okay, well, that's actually a really important thing. Hey, this is what that felt like when you talked to me that way. How did that feel for you? And I feel like, see, this is what we knew was going to happen. Our brains were going to bumble and like go all over. And so now the 2 final thoughts I'm having is, 1, it's why it's so important to explore what's the threat of failure. Like you said, what does that mean? But also what's the opportunity created in that? And then what I think about there is, if she doesn't get the chance to do it that way, how is she going to develop the skills and the values, particularly the values to decide, I don't want to be a dick. not I can't be a dick because
Right.
then my parents won't love me.
Right.
I want to be kind because it feels better. I don't like hurting people. That's a values-based decision that she comes to because I'm supporting her growth through that. And the final piece that's coming up, and then I'll pause and see where your brain jumps with this, is the one thing I'm proud of a lot. It always activates my shame because my shame says that then you're being arrogant, but I'm going to just allow myself to say it. One thing I'm really proud of for myself as a parent is that I don't believe that I'm owed respect purely because I'm her mom. I believe that it is a mutual co-creation of respect. And sometimes there are boundaries as her parent I have to put in place for her for safety, for whatever. But one of the ways that I've really tried to create that is she is always allowed to ask me why.
Yes.
If I say no, if I say this is the way it is, she is always allowed to ask me why because she deserves to understand. She doesn't have to accept or like it,
Correct.
but she deserves to understand what I'm doing. And if I feel threatened by her asking why, that's my shit to deal with. And that is a sign that I have stuff because it would have been a threat to my caregiver to ask why. She's not being disrespectful. She's trying to understand. And if I can't give a good enough reason, and it's happened before, sometimes she'll ask something like, she asked me this morning, can I have a mint before we went to school? And I said, I don't know if we'll do mints this morning. She goes, can I ask why? And I said, yep. Sat there. I don't have a good reason. You can have a mint if you want one. She goes, okay, is that okay? Yeah, I don't have a good reason. In my mind, it was like, it's morning, but like, I don't really think that's a good enough reason. Like, it's a mint. You've been coughing. You aren't old enough to have cough drops. Like, they're little throat choking hazards. Like, you could have one of your mints. Yeah. And it's like, just her safety and being able to ask me why is a sign that I am like opening the door, that it's not about compliance, but she does respect me enough not to just do what she wants. She asks, and I respect her enough to say, oh, sometimes I don't know. Sometimes like that's a small failure for me too, to learn, oh, what's my reaction? What do I do? So I'm going to pause because I'm sure this is kicking up a lot. What's coming up for you as I said all that back?
I love so much of what you just said, I think comes back to the 4 C's. So what I heard you talking about was the way you are modeling compassion and connection. So when you're modeling compassion for yourself, and I say this as woman to woman, and for the moms listening, not to exclude dads, it's a cultural thing with women that we especially are taught to deny, abandon, and suppress our femininity and our own internal needs and desires in order to serve others, to be the nurturer, the caregiver. And by not doing that, by honoring yourself, you are modeling compassion for yourself by allowing your daughter to ask you why. And I did the same thing with our kids. And actually, I had someone over the other day. My kids are 21 and 23 now. They're young men. And I was asking in front of this other friend who was over, I was asking my oldest if he could, I had some other younger teenagers coming over. I said, could you please set up the gaming system downstairs so when they're here, they can play that. I'd like it done by this time. And he said, he looked at me for a second and he goes, or how about if I did it by this time and blah, blah, blah. And I sat there for a minute and thought, yep, okay, that would work for me. And this friend told me after, he said, I never would have ever let my kids speak to me that way. And I thought it was really sweet how you did that and created that. And that's the 4th C I hear you leaning into is connection. In order to have connection, we need to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
Not weak, not doormats.
No, right.
We need to be vulnerable. So I hear you being vulnerable in you being willing to even check your own story. Like, it's morning, we shouldn't have mints. Where does that come from? Is that actually real? Is that important? Is that a cultural thing? Is that a dentist thing? Woo, where did I, like all that. So you were connecting with yourself. You cannot have connection if you do not create understanding. In order to have connection, we need to be curious. You were being curious with yourself. You were allowing your daughter to be respectfully curious with you. And you created understanding. To your point, whether you had disagreed or agreed, you upheld the boundary, you didn't, I don't really care. You
Yes.
created understanding. That kind of connection is actually the foundation to the thing that almost every parent wants, called influence. You cannot have influence if you do not have connection.
Ooh.
Okay. So there you were in an overarching model of healthy compliance and capability with your daughter.
Yep.
Okay. You were integrating compassion and connection, and look at what you built. You actually were building all four. Okay.
Yeah.
But this is
Yes.
why we need the integration. We need to stop having this obsession with compliance, which doesn't mean what we all thought it meant anyway, and capability. And we need to integrate compassion
Yes.
and connection so that we get this really healthy version of a resilient child. And this is the other thing I wanted to talk about, is that with your daughter, when you're talking about like she was being a dick and she's like coming out at you and all these things, is that you cannot have resilience when we continue to be obsessed with performance. Here's the key as to why, and I know you know this, but I want our listeners to be so empowered by this. This blew my mind when I heard this. When you have performance, you are parenting in a way that is expecting your child to protect you from your own fears. And that's that codependence enmeshment thing that you said. You are requiring, literally requiring your child to perform to protect you from your own unhealed pain and fear of disconnection. Now, so what your child learns is that failure is an internalized mark of their worth as a human being. Anyone, but particularly children, because they don't have the intellectual filter to say, screw you, that doesn't feel right. When they internalize failure, so in the moment of failure, so there she was being a dick to you, in that moment, I'm going to call that failure just for the purpose of this example.
Exactly, right.
Okay. So there she is failing at being respectful, if you will. When we meet our children in the moment of failure with humiliation or shame or something very harsh, or don't you dare, or shutting down their feelings, whatever that looks like, there is only one path. And what happens is they again learn that they are wrong. They didn't do something wrong, right? They are wrong.
Yes.
It chips away, it erodes their internal sense of confidence.
Yes.
Which means, and this is the key part, it erodes confidence, which was required in order to try. So they learn that they are a failure and they will actually try less and do less and learn less because they believe they eventually don't have what it takes to do such, and their risk of disconnection has become too big. So that is the definition of low resilience, high helplessness, high hopelessness.
Yes.
Whereas in the moment of failure, again, I'm going to use that failure where she was reacting, being very direct with you. When it's met with compassion and connection, not because it's tolerating or encouraging disrespectful behavior, but you're willing to be curious about the behavior.
Yes.
She has no sense of having failed. Therefore, what happened and her behavior remains outside of her. She's able to look at it like we would a Rubik's Cube, turn it to all the sides, get curious about it. Like, how was I feeling? I was tired. I was hungry. I had an unmet need. I didn't know how to articulate all those things. Now her learning brain is engaged.
Yes.
And her confidence builds. So she is more hopeful and she feels she has agency and power over her life. She's willing to try more, take on bigger challenges, even when she fails. And that is the definition of resilient.
I mean, that is so beautifully articulated, and really for everyone listening is the difference in when people are like, well, some shame is helpful because it guides our behaviors. No. Guilt is what we're looking for. Guilt is, I'm going to explore this behavior. How does this behavior feel to me? Oh, that didn't feel good. It felt kind of yucky. I wonder why. I did like everything you just said with the Rubik's Cube. Or then the next time she might go, ooh, that didn't feel good in my body, which is what we do all the time. Sometimes I am a dick to her, to other people. Oh, that did not feel good. I wonder what was going on. What can I learn and how can I evolve? And
Mhm.
that's what we are empowering. And so I think about this as we kind of wrap everything up and starting to think about what the takeaways are. One of the things that seems really evident to me in what you're talking about, I like to think about stories and writing our story and how much of our
Mhm.
story was written for us, how much of other people's stories are we trying to write for them.
Right.
And it feels like a lot of what you're really trying to empower people to do is to take themselves out of the center of their child's story
Yeah.
and to learn how to put themselves into the center of their own, healing
Right.
their own shame, their own wounds, their own feeling like they were non-compliant, shame-driven people,
Mm.
and also not making their kids responsible for then healing that. And so really shifting the role we take in our kids' stories and in our own. And
Mhm.
I'm curious thinking about this. One, there's going to be a ton of people that are like, oh my gosh, I just need to go connect with Allie right now and be like, help me with all the things. So we're going to get to that part, everybody. Don't worry. We're going to talk about how you can connect with her, how you can work with her. But I'm curious before that, could you just help people recenter? Because again, their brains are going to do what ours are doing,
Right.
but they're going to be feeling that wound. They're going to be feeling that pain and that shame and that obligation and that pressure is going to be right there waiting for them. And so if you were to
Mhm.
invite people to take just
Mhm.
one next step in their process, what would you suggest to them from here?
Breathe.
Mm.
Because we can make it super complicated and sciencey, but that's not going to help in the moment. And we all know that because shame, it feels so
Yeah.
overwhelming and visceral, it can bring you to your knees. There is no
Yes.
faster and simpler and freer way to begin to calm your nervous system, which shame will hijack. Then I do this for real, my own, myself, I don't care how public it is. I take
Yep.
both my hands, I put them over my heart, stack palm on palm, put them over my heart, put a little bit of pressure so my body knows I'm there. And I close my eyes for a minute and I take a deep breath in. And I take a deep breath out and I say to myself or out loud, I say, I am safe.
Mm-hmm.
And I do it probably 5 times. And I might do that multiple times a day. And I don't care who's watching,
Yep.
because if I am going to be a leader in becoming whole
Yes.
and making that wildly safe, then I'm going to
Yes.
be wildly weird about it. So
Yes.
there you go.
I
Breathe.
love that.
And
Breathe.
I'll breathe with you anytime. Let's do it.
Breathe. And I love that. And I think that's one of the things that's really beautiful about the work that you do. And it's, there are amazing people in the coaching, the therapy, the training world. One of the things that I think often gets missed when we're looking for the gems inside of that is someone who says, I'm with you in this. I'm not going to fix you. I'm not going to solve you. My
No,
ego is not running the show because that's not my
no,
job. But
no.
my job is to help co-create a safe space for you to be vulnerable and to do the healing. And I think that's a gift that you really give the people that you're working with is I am meeting you where you're at and I'm going to sit right next to you and I'm not going to
Yes.
carry you through it because I'm not going to reinforce this idea that you are not capable.
Mm-mm.
And I'm not going to keep you disconnected from yourself and put you in a position where you're reliant on me. I'm going to be here with you and I'm going to help you reconnect to yourself, to feel safe connecting with others, to build that compassion. Again, bringing those 4 C's into that full spectrum for the parent so they can start to think about what that looks like for their child. And so, okay, before we end, again, I promised you listeners we'd get here. How do they connect with you when they are all just chomping at the bit for more Allie?
They can find me on social media, TikTok and Instagram at Allie Payne. My website is allypain.com. It's ALYPAIN. I have a ton of free resources and downloads and some awesome programs launching in January. So check me out.
I love it. I love it. And listeners, remember, with any of these episodes, the goal is not to feel like it's resolved, it's clear cut, here's all the solutions. It's to get us thinking and to create that safety to be curious. And so come back to this episode as many times as you need to. It's going to be there for you. Share this with anybody, other parents, your partner, other people in your kids' lives, teachers. It's a great opportunity for us to just be thinking about what impact can we have if we just get a little bit more curious about the role compliance has played into how all of us function in the world, not as a judgment, not as a pointing fingers, but just, I wonder where that came from and what would it look like if we chose a different path. And so, as always, we are here for you. If you want to be sure to know whenever new content gets released, hit that subscribe button. Otherwise, we will see you back here next Sunday for another episode.